This is WTCN TV, Channel 11, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
A very happy Friday morning to you, and welcome to What's New. And we also welcome our very lovely audience today. You chastised me for that yesterday a little bit, Nancy, but I really mean it. You're a gorgeous-looking group of women.
They are all learners. Pronounce it for me, please. The what society?
Phylethians.
Phylethians, which means they just want to learn. What a place to do it.
We're going to teach it today, I'll tell you. And we do have, as I earlier introduced him, a very handsome gentleman with us today as our guest on What's New. And they spontaneously broke into a welcome round of applause, and I would like you to do that again, if you would, please, for Senator Wendell Anderson. And Senator, we do thank you very much for joining us here today on What's New.
I'm delighted to be back.
Somewhat belatedly, we wish you a Happy New Year.
Well, thank you. I think it was last year, about the 4th of July or Memorial
That's right.
Day.
When you and Mary were here.
Yes.
Lest we, I want to break a myth right now. Senators have fun. He is wearing a Mickey Mouse watch. I couldn't believe it when I sat down and I saw this. Aren't you afraid of your image, Senator?
I've worn it for years.
Have you really?
Our children, I think, would be very upset if I didn't wear it.
How have you been?
Busy, but good. I love my work, and I'm very fortunate. The family is getting along extremely well, enjoying the new neighborhood and
Good.
the kids in the neighborhood and the school.
You have come under tremendous criticism, and I heard you make what I thought an extremely interesting statement. You've been involved in a lot of issues that directly affect virtually everyone in the United States. Energy, situations with the car manufacturers, the oil dealers. And you've said that many people in Minnesota haven't even bothered to talk to you extensively about those things that affect millions of people. But there's a little hubbub about something that happens up north, or continued concern over the fact that you appointed yourself to the senatorship, and that's all that we seem to want to talk about, and that concerns you.
Well, I think that the most critical problem we have is the energy crisis. Unfortunately, we think that if we can drive into a filling station, buy a gallon of gasoline for 60 cents, and there's no line, that there's no energy crisis. The fact is, anybody who's living on Social Security or fixed income, that the dollar is just withering away. Inflation is here, and it's largely due to the fact that we are consuming about 9 million gallons, 9 million barrels of foreign oil every single day. We're more dependent on foreign oil today than we were in 1973. We're the only country in the world where this is true, where we're consuming more and more of somebody else's oil. We're going to have a $27 billion deficit hanging over from 1977. We're told that for every $5 billion worth of foreign oil that we bring in here, it costs us 200,000 American jobs. The fact is that the Swedes, for example, they have a high standard of living. They don't have oil. They are able to maintain a very high standard of living, and they only consume a third of the oil that we consume. But they drive cars that make sense from a environmental standpoint. They build homes and factories with energy conservation in mind. Rather than taking garbage and throwing it into a dump someplace that smells up the neighborhood, they burn it. A ton of garbage has about 2/3 of the BTUs of a ton of coal, and it doesn't have the sulfur that coal has. So we're going to have to start doing some of these things, and we are. Here in the Twin Cities, we're going to, in St. Paul, for example, by the end of this year, they're going to build a plant to burn garbage rather than to build more and more dumps. So there's so many things we can do to tighten our belt and still maintain our standard of living if we recognize that we do have our energy crisis.
Senator, I would like to bring up something that we talked about the other day, and I have subsequently been chastised a little bit by one of our viewers, because we talked a little bit about the energy with one of your colleagues from the other side of the Capitol, from the House.
Sure.
And talked about the energy credit that might occur, the tax credit that might occur for people who would insulate their homes. And this gentleman, who's a senior citizen, said, well, that's great for people who can afford to insulate. They're going to get a tax credit. But what about some of us who simply can't afford it? He said, why don't you get an answer to that?
Well, there is an answer for that. We have a state housing program in Minnesota, and it's particularly senior citizens. If they can't afford to bring their house up to code, or if they want to insulate their home, they can get a grant from the State Housing Authority to do that. That's a program that has been in effect for about 3-4 years. Not very many people know about it, but we have a $600 million state housing authority. So there are techniques and ways to deal with that if they're interested, and I'm glad that you raised that point.
Okay. And they would contact...
the State Housing Authority.
Okay.
Money is available for that purpose.
Two of the organizations that you have met head-on with in some rather strong confrontations are the auto manufacturers and the oil dealers. Are these people, as manufacturers, and let's talk about the conglomerate as opposed to individuals, are they really interested in what's best for America, or are they willing to ride the profit bandwagon?
I'd have to say that I think the oil companies, for example, do not have credibility in Washington, D.C. with the Congress or with the American people. They don't share the information that they have with us. We don't know how much money they invest in basic research, what they invest in terms of trying to discover new oil.
Have we asked them for this information?
Yes,
they won't give
we
it
have.
to us.
And I don't think they've made the case, for example, for deregulation of natural gas. Of the 7 largest corporations in this country, 5 of them are oil companies. Exxon is number 1, then you've got General Motors, Ford. The next 4 are oil companies. And what I believe in competition, and I don't like the idea that they're moving into the area of uranium, where they now control nearly half the uranium resources. They're moving into coal. They have about 25% of the coal. I think there ought to be competition between coal and oil, between natural gas and maybe atomic power. And I don't see us moving in that direction. So I think that the biggest problem is that I don't think, again, either the Congress or the people trust them. And maybe we ought to, but we don't. And I think it's a credibility problem, and I think we should be honest with one another, share the information we have. If the American people have the facts and the Congress have the facts, I think we're much more apt to make the right decision.
Senator, could you explain for some of us who are probably still a little bit fuzzy on this business of deregulation?
Yes.
Could you briefly explain what that is and whether or not you favor it?
I'm very much opposed to the deregulation of natural gas. Under the existing federal law, the natural gas companies can only charge, I shouldn't say only, can charge $1.46 cents for 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas. Back in about 1970, they're getting 26 cents. So they're up to $1.46 right now. Under the president's proposal, he would permit them to go to about $1.76. Keep in mind that for every 10-cent increase, it's going to cost the American consumer about $5 billion. About a third of the people in Minnesota heat with natural gas. The price has gone up dramatically since 1973. If we deregulate, many people feel the price will go up in 1 year 25 to 30%. In a 10-year period, sky's the limit. We think that the oil companies have made tremendous profits in the last 4 or 5 years without deregulation. The top 20 oil companies have either doubled their profits, tripled, or quadrupled their profits in the last 4 or 5 years.
Then why are they crying that they need help from us?
I think they're crying wolf, and they're not making the case. As you know, the House resisted. The Senate, in a very close vote, provided for deregulation. It's basically a fight between the states that have natural gas, like Texas and Louisiana, and those of us from consuming states. But I was very much opposed to it. I'm pleased that the president is against it. And again, there's only so much natural gas in the world. God only created so much. And it seems to me that we should try to conserve it. We ought to make sure that maybe our grandchildren are left with a few barrels of oil and a little bit of natural gas. And I don't think that they need more incentives. What they've done, in many cases, they've discovered the natural gas, they put a cap on it, it's in the inventory, and they're just waiting for us to take the price lid off so they can charge us more.
This, I believe, in fact, is happening right now in Louisiana. They've located a major new field down there, which they believe could supply approximately 10% of all the needs of America. Unfortunately, they're successfully completing only 1 out of every 3 or 4 wells, and each of them cost them about $5 million. So they're kind of sitting there hoping that something's going to happen.
Well, I think the big thing to remember is that it is a finite resource. There's only so much of it. We have a lot of coal. We have to look to alternative sources of energy, primarily at this point coal. I think we should save our natural gas and our oil just for those areas where it's desperately needed, fertilizer and for industry and the rest of it. And I think if we want to, again, balance our payments and so forth, we're just going to have to tighten our belt a little bit.
Senator, let us tighten our belt in terms of time. We need to take a commercial break. When we come back, let's address the fact that you've been criticized for appointing yourself.
Be happy to.
All right?
Now that you have
of what is sometimes referred to as the world's most exclusive club. He is the senior senator from the state of Minnesota, the Honorable Wendell R. Anderson.
You better say junior senator,
senator?
Or Hubert Humphrey will be on the phone with him in about 4 seconds.
My goodness, you're right. I blew that, didn't I?
Yes, you did badly.
I'm thinking of your predecessor, of course.
Right.
Now,
That's right.
Vice President
Exactly.
Montiel. Well, that leads me right into this matter anyhow, because, Nancy, you suggest we should talk about your appointment.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
And the justification that you feel.
Well, first, there was a Senate vacancy December of 1976. First of all, people say to me, Wendy, why didn't you call a special election? You'd won anyway, at least we think you'd have won, and I would have loved to have done that. I've been running for public office every 2 years, every 4 years, since I was a little boy. I love running for public office.
That's what you do.
I was elected governor in '70, and I was re-elected in 1974 by kind of a nice margin. And
yes, kind of.
And the folks from Minnesota will have a crack at me in November of 1978. I didn't sneak up on them, but the truth is, I could have appointed someone just to warm a seat for 2 years, a caretaker. I rejected that. It's tough enough to have a strong voice in the Senate if they think you might come back. If they know you're not coming back, why bother even to go down? I could have picked somebody else. Frankly, I thought it's tougher to be governor than to be Secretary of State, to be lieutenant governor, to be auditor or anything. In terms of the record, I felt my record was a pretty good one. I honestly felt that I could do a good job. I thought I was the best person for it.
How much would a special election have cost the Minnesotans, by the way?
Too much. It cost plenty. And not only that, you don't get much of a turnout for a special election. Beyond that, people say, Wendy Anderson is ambitious for him to do that. I am ambitious. I am ambitious. I tell you, you don't become a teacher, a doctor, a good farmer, a good housewife or mother, or anything worthwhile, unless you have some ambition. I've never been drafted to run for anything. No group of prominent clergymen came to see me to get me to run for governor or for the state legislature or anything else. It was my idea. I'm not embarrassed by that. Would you go to a doctor who didn't have confidence in himself? I don't think a person should be arrogant or cocky or anything of the sort, but I am saying there isn't anything wrong with thinking inside that maybe you can do a good job. And as I say, this is my 20th year holding public office. 20 years.
You didn't sneak up on us, you're right.
And as I say, my name has been on the ballot many. I knew it would be an issue. But if I had appointed somebody else, people would say, that guy Anderson, he certainly didn't have much confidence in himself. If I had appointed, say, a caretaker, and now this year said I'm going to run for this, and why should they vote for me in 1978 if I wasn't willing to vote for myself in December of 1976?
Is it a situation of you were damned if you do and damned if you don't?
Senator,
absolutely.
Would you contrast the two offices, that of governor and senator, the differences and the similarities?
Yeah, I would say that, I must tell you, I work hard in the Senate, but the position of governor is much more difficult because you're on the front line every single day. There's no passing the buck. The governor has to make the decisions, and I think it's the toughest job in the world, with the exception of the office of president and mayor of New York. But after that, I think the position of governor is the toughest.
And the man who succeeded you, not only is on the front line, he's on the power line every day, as it now turns out.
That's right. And so you can't win. There's no good place to build a freeway. There's no good place to put a power line except do it on the other fellow's land, not on mine. And there are no easy answers to so many of the problems. And that's why I think the position of governor is really very difficult.
Senator Anderson, we'd like to give you a chance here to catch your breath, and at the same time, we'll tempt you with Chef Meadow's famous recipe for... It's your request.
Your request. The senator will be back, too.
To order COD, call 1-800-323-7300.
We continue to visit today with our guest, Senator Wendell R. Anderson. Senator, have you been in touch with your colleague in the Senate?
I was lucky enough last week. I was with Fritz Mondale, and it was his birthday, and Hubert, who's incredibly thoughtful, called Fritz, and I had a chance to visit with him a little bit. He's just a national treasure. I was so happy that President Carter took him up to Camp David. Very wise for him to do that. And he spent 4 or 5 hours just visiting with Hubert, because there's no one that knows more about government, public service. He knows just about every single world leader. He's the most respected and most loved man in the Senate, and he's been incredibly decent and kind and gracious to me. And I just...
He's very fond of you, by the way.
Well, thank you. You know, my family went out to Air Force 2 when Vice President Mondale flew with Hubert back here, and I went along. And as Hubert got on the plane, and before he got on, his sister got on. And my little 7-year-old boy had told everybody in his class that Hubert Humphrey was his uncle. And he didn't realize until all these people got on and he saw the other relatives that Hubert Humphrey wasn't his uncle. And so, you know, I told Hubert that, you know, and Hubert looked at my little boy and he said, "Brett, I am your uncle." Oh. And you know, my kids, since they were toddlers, every time they saw Hubert on the television screen, they would, that's Humphrey. That's Humphrey. I mean, there's a certain spark there, that warmth that no one else has. And
yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus.
Yeah. And you said something so important. You said that he's respected on both sides of the aisle. The Republican Party has certainly felt a respect for him, though often in opposition to him. Is that because he has always known the art of compromise, for which he's often been criticized?
I think in part that, but it's impossible for Hubert Humphrey to hate, to have any vengeance in his heart. I mean, he loves people. He's strong. He's not weak. He's very strong, but he can't hold a grudge. It's just not part of his character. You know, we're coming back on the plane right before Christmas, and he took a little nap and so forth, and it wasn't his best day. He's kind of uncomfortable. You know what he did? He got up and went up and down that airplane, shaking hands with everybody, visiting a little bit. You know, a lot of them were people that were on Vice President Mondale's staff, and he bragged about the Mondale. He just, but what I went to see him in the hospital right before Thanksgiving, and he was going through some painful treatments and so forth, and I sat down with him, and he gave me a little speech. He said, "Now, when you get back to Minnesota, you ought to do this, and don't do that, and you ought to do this, and work harder, and don't worry about..." I mean, it's such an uplifting experience just to be around him. The greatest thing that has ever happened to me, and that will ever happen to me, is that I was able to take a little bit of an apprenticeship under Hubert Humphrey, and that nothing better could happen to anyone who's interested in public service.
Would you mind repeating this little anecdote you told us about his pharmacy background on the plane?
Oh, I just, Nancy, his daughter, was going to give him a little prescription, you know, and he looked at that and he said, "Well, it's about 1 millimeter too much," and poured it back and did it all himself, you know, and I just thought that was just tremendous.
He's still playing the pharmacist.
You bet he is. You bet he is.
You know, if anyone ever thought that a senator, any public representative, doesn't have to work hard, they just don't know much about what goes on. Now, though you live in Washington with your family, you work in Washington, am I correct in understanding that last year you made 52 trips back to Minnesota?
I made about 55 trips back to Minnesota.
More than one a week?
More than 1 week I was back 3 times. This is the way you look if you've eaten 1,000 meals on Northwest Airlines.
All that plastic food. And do you know that the senator, part of your job, of course, is meeting people, listening to your constituents, and shaking hands. And I went out to the lobby to meet the senator this morning, and he shook my hand with his left hand, and he apologized. But why?
I have a tennis elbow or a politician's elbow from shaking hands. People, you know, they shake your hand, some of them go, particularly those wonderful Minnesota dairy farmers, and so in self-protection, I'll give them a good handshake and get in there first, but it has done something up here.
You don't play tennis, you just have tennis elbow.
No, it is our politician's elbow.
So, see, I have a little tidbit I'll share with you here in the minute we have left, Senator. My colleague Mel Jazz gets this a lot, and for some reason people want to usually shake hands with Mel and then they put him right to the floor, that kind of thing. And he learned a little trick. He turns out when he shakes hands, he extends his hand. Well, we'll do it left hand. He extends this way, and that way you can't grip your hand if you put it out flat as opposed to this way.
Yes. Why didn't you tell me that 10 years ago?
Well, where were you when you needed you? You have about 1.5 minutes to be brilliant. Is there anything else you want to be sure we talk about today?
Well, I guess if I could have a minute is the Panama Canal Treaties. Most Minnesotans are very much against the new treaties. I'm for them. Mr. Humphrey is for them. Basically, in 1905, what happened is this. There was no country of Panama. There was a country of Colombia. We went to the Colombians. We said, "May we build a canal down here?" They said no. So we encouraged the Panamanians to break away. We sent our ships in there, and then we immediately recognized Panama and signed an agreement allowing us to build a canal there with a Frenchman. We never had an agreement on the part of the Panamanians permitting us to do it.